Today, you should get a notice that I am recording, I believe, and I'll let you guys get started. Thanks so much.
Yeah, I'm Anastasia Trolson. I'm the director of our CPA department with KVC, and I've been with KVC for about 10 years, and I've been in this role for about 4.5. We also have Adrienne, our director of admissions, and I think she's having trouble getting unmuted, so she can go first with her PowerPoint. Is there any way you can unmute her? Maybe.
I missed what you're saying, so if I can be of help, let me know.
Is it possible you can unmute Adrienne, because she's having a hard time with sharing her screen to unmute herself?
All I can do is ask her. There we go.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah,
no, it was highlighted, so I couldn't even touch it. So
Okay,
I don't know.
perfect.
Thank you. Here I am. Good to see everyone. And like Anastasia said, I am the director of admissions. I was previously with Permanency in Douglas County. And so we'll go ahead and start with my PowerPoint today. Let's see. Can you guys see that okay? Okay, so KVC Admissions, essentially we're the hub of KVC. We receive all of the calls that come into the main phone line of the agency. We operate 24/7, 365 days out of the year. The majority of the phone calls are from foster parents, bio parents, caseworkers, home workers, subcontractors. We assist with crisis intervention. If admissions can't help, then we transfer it to a different department, such as Anastasia's CPA. We take critical incident reports from foster homes, relatives, subcontractors, group homes, facilities, and hospitals. After we get these critical incident reports, we write them up, all of the details up, and then we notify the proper people that are included, like the case team, depending on the severity of the incident. We either call or email. We also, one of the main things that we do is we process all initial referrals for KVC youth when they come into our care. This includes all the initial paperwork from DCF. We locate placement. We enter in all the data into our system as well as DCF's care match system. We facilitate placement changes for youth that have a disruption notice in, youth needing to move closer to home county, and youth who are ready for a lower level of care. So this is like the placement change forms that you may have heard about, like in court reports and things like that. We also process all notification, well, that's the next thing, sorry. Process all notifications of placement change, status changes, and address changes, which is the PCFs. We create and send placement agreements to foster homes, subcontractors, relatives, interkins, and congregate care facilities.
Adrienne, are you going to go a little bit further into how the placement works? I think that's one of the curiosities, is like an average time, or are you calling, are multiple people calling multiple placements? I mean, I know you have like 4 hours to make initial placement. Is that still accurate?
Yes, yeah. And we're working with Anastasia's team as well as kinship, and we're reaching out to homes as soon as we get the referral in.
Okay, awesome. Thanks.
Yeah. Sorry, where was I at? We participate in monthly staffings with subcontractors to work on identifying potential placement options they may have available for KVC youth. We track all of the level of care changes. We send rate increase and rate drop notifications, write new placement agreements for these changes and send them out. We accept all police protective custody referrals and identify placement options for the youth. And then we have another little area within our department that works on non-contract. So for this part of our department, we locate placements within KVC homes and residential facilities, such as our KVC QRTP for other subcontractors' youth. So like from St. Francis, TFI, or Cornerstones. We also reconcile discrepancies between our systems, and the sponsoring agency to ensure everyone receives accurate and timely payments. Okay, so here are some of the questions that Heather had sent out to us. Our admissions department interacts with all other departments within the agency, including permanency, adoption, aftercare, CPA, kinship, all of the departments. A couple of the short-term words that we use a lot in admissions is the PCF, which is the placement change form. And Heather, back to your question, that is what is entered in by the case team, and that sends a notification to us, and that's how we're looking for placement. So it'll say a description of the kid, what level of care that kid might have, or be all of the different, oh gosh, I'm trying to think, all of the different things about the youth, I guess. You know, everything pretty much that you need to know about that youth for the most part is on the PCF, and then that's how we send it out to other agencies and call homes. And then level of care, LOC is another short term, which is called, it means level of care, and that comes also with our PCFs. And the level of care is used to determine what type of placement we're looking for that youth based on their needs. So this form identifies different areas such as behaviors in school, if they're a runner, do they have any medical needs, and then the score is compiled, and that helps when we're looking for the placement options. Anastasia's team also helps out with the level of cares as well. And then it says, how do you work with other agencies providing permanency and adoption services in Kansas? We participate in regular staffings with the other agencies as well as DCF. We staff with DECA, St. Francis monthly, Cornerstones. I meet with a team from Cornerstones as well. Let's see, just going over youth and then homes. I wasn't able, Heather, to find, or we just started using a new HR management thing with our payroll and everything. And so we don't have our,
Nancy.
Thank you. Yeah. The org sheet that you were asking about. But anyway, I did have this because you were asking about how many staff are in our departments. We have about 20 in admissions right now. We are short staffed. But that's typically 2 supervisors and then about 18 intake coordinators. And then these are the counties that KVC serves. So, but if we're speaking about Douglas County, then that's the KC metro area, and that includes Johnson County as well.
Sure.
And then let's see. Another one of the questions was, what information do you have about placements that are not sponsored by KVC? So we use Care Match, which is DCF's system, and we're able to look up in that system about homes, as well as we reach out to the agency. So again, St. Francis, TFI, whatever agency they're sponsored with. How do you use the DCF placement matching system? We run reports such as matching families, and that comes out of the Care Match, which is what I think you were referring to in that question. The most rewarding thing about our work, one of our staff answered, is helping people. Another one answered with finding long-term placement options for our youth. And what is the most frustrating thing about your work? One of our staff answered with when we can't find placement option or a youth refuses to go to placement. I think that's pretty much across the board. It can be really discouraging if it's 10 or 11 o'clock at night and we finally located a placement, and Anastasia can probably attest to this too, but we finally locate a placement option and then the youth is like, no, I'm not going, and refuses. And unfortunately, there's not a whole lot we can do when they refuse a placement, except for try to encourage them to try it at least for the night. And then, do you receive closure, knowing what happens long-term to any of the children you help with KVC? Yes, we do. Sometimes we hear about youth that are reintegrated or youth that are aging out of the system. Unfortunately, we hear if kids come back in, so that's not good. If CRB and CASA volunteers could tell community members one thing about KVC admissions, what would you want them to know? We would want them to know that our ultimate goal is to help everyone that contacts us. We average about 150 calls a day from various entities, like I said before. So we really want to do our best to help everyone. And if we can't help them, we want to direct them to the right department or agency that can. If it's not anything, sometimes we get calls that aren't even anything to do with KVC. They might need to talk to DCF if they want to make a hotline report or something like that. And then we also want to place all children in a long-term placement where all of their needs are met and they receive the stability they deserve as they work towards their end goal of reaching permanency, whether that's reintegration or adoption. That's all I had. Do you guys have any questions for me? Sorry, I talked kind of fast.
That's okay. I held up my slow sign, but it was black on white paper and I didn't think you could see it.
Let's see both.
I had a question about the DCF CARES match. Is that the right term? Okay. I'd only heard of the system when I was on a statewide committee and it was prior to implementation. Can you talk a little bit more about, and you may not have a comparison because it was in place, I think, when you went to admissions, but do you see some benefits to all agencies having access to that information? And do you sometimes, or do you always step outside of the KVC homes to make placements, just looking for the best match in general?
Yeah, we do sometimes step outside of KVC homes. I do think Care Match is beneficial that we can all see it. I think Anastasia might have more feedback on Care Match because she has more experience with it than I do personally, like you said, from being in admissions. But I do think overall it is helpful for us to be able to see it. We do use a lot of our own internal system with it's called CARE also for our homes. And then our CPA department, we rely on them greatly in admissions. So
it sounded to me when I had talked with other providers when I was in my hometown who has a different, I guess you called that subcontractor, a different subcontractor that licenses and sponsors foster homes, that it didn't lessen any work because most agencies such as KVC and St. Francis chose to maintain what they had previously about the homes that they had been working with, and that they, is sponsor the right word for that? Yeah. So who has to enter all the information? Somebody at DCF entered all of that, or do you input your new homes into it? Oh, that's probably a Stasio question, right?
Well, yeah. DCF enters. Yeah, go ahead. I'll let you go.
So when we get a new family, DCF will enter the new family into the Care Match system when we submit the licensing paperwork to them. And Adrienne's workers help with like the upkeep of knowing where everybody is. So her team, once we enter a PCF, that placement communication form, they'll go in and enter in Care Match where that child moved. So everybody is aware. I will say that you were right, like prior to that system being made, we already had our own internal system to where we could look for we have our own matching system essentially. And so ours is a little bit more sophisticated, and I mean that in the most polite way to DC. Where we have a little bit more attributes is what we call them in looking for families. So the attributes for different families say like what the family will accept. So they say like will accept, won't accept, or conditionally accept. And so those are inputted into Care Match and help to determine the best placement option for that child. Also looking at location, what it doesn't look at gender, but it looks at ages. Some of the issues with just utilizing that system is that it won't pull up homes that are already at capacity. And so each foster home can have a max of 4 placements, or be licensed for 4 placements. But they'll be licensed for anywhere from 1 to 4 because they may not have the room or the bed space for those kids. So if a home is already full, they won't pull up on that matching system. Whereas we may look at our list and know this home has the ability to take another child. We would just need to do an exception through DCF to place over capacity for that home. So.
And then a follow-up to that was a statement Adrienne made about adding up some information that something or someone scores the child, I think.
Yeah. Do you want to go into that, Adrienne, or you want me to go through the level of care? Okay, so she's talking about the level of care, and so that rates the child based on behaviors that they may experience as well as age. And so it is kind of like a scoring system where a check mark is made based off of like if they've had sexual inappropriate behaviors or if they have a lot of medical needs. And then that is what develops the amount of reimbursement that the family or relative will receive. And so we have basic 1, 2, 3, and then we have intensive 1 and 2. And then there are some additional rates. There's a new therapeutic foster home rate that has to be approved through DCF. And then there's like the tier rated for IDD youth as well.
Great, thanks for that.
Yeah, does that kind of answer that question?
I think so, unless any of the volunteers or CASA want to clarify. Okay.
This is Jill, CRB. I have a question. Am I being heard?
Yeah.
Okay, so you're talking about levels of reimbursement. I think a lot of people are curious, if they don't already know, about what are actually the monetary, in general, can you give us a sense of how much the placement homes receive at different levels of care?
Yeah, absolutely. If you give me 1 second, I can actually pull that up so I can give you the correct numbers instead of the ones on the top of my head. And Adrienne, if you want to try and stop sharing your screen at any point, that would be great. So let me pull that up for you real quick. Unless you have them handy.
I don't actually, thank you, but I did stop sharing my screen. Sorry, I should have.
And I did make you a co-host, so you should be able to.
Okay, I am not actually going to share my screen. I was just going to
read. Okay, great.
Yeah. Sorry, 1 second. So I know basic 1 is $24 a day. Basic 2 is, I'm still trying to pull it up, is approximately 42. Basic 3 is approximately 60. And then 75 and 90 are the other two. I apologize. I should have planned that somebody would ask me that question.
Me too, and I apologize because I meant to have them.
Okay. It is.
I unmuted. Yeah. What do the families, the placement families, say about that level of payment? What are their concerns? How much influence do they have to change the payment in any way?
That's a good question. And it depends on the family. I mean, some families feel like the reimbursement amount that they're getting is sufficient to meet the kids' daily needs. And then other families feel like there are a lot more needs that the rate needs to be adjusted for. So that level of care can be completed at any time, but we require it to be completed every 90 days for the children. just to ensure that they're still meeting that level of care, or maybe it's increased. And then our families also are able to complete a caregiver assessor tool. And so they go in, and it's a little different than the child's questions that are just about behaviors, but they go in and answer questions about things that they may need every day, like diapers, even for like older youth, for example, like a 6-year-old that may still have issues with incontinence. Or some of the things that they have to pay for repairs because the child's being physically aggressive with others, breaking things, throwing things like that. And so that caregiver assessor tool is actually 60% of the overall payment amount, that score. And so it goes 60% caregiver tool, 40% LOC, and then together it makes that overall reimbursement amount. And so sometimes that will also increase the rate if there's a need for it.
I have 2 more questions. Heather, did you want to go first?
I just wanted to make sure that in my mind I had it right, because it has changed, and for volunteers that had been trained some years ago, I'm letting in a Jan's iPad, Brooksy, if that's one of your people. DCF sets the rates currently, not does the assessment necessarily, but DCF sets the rates, and they actually pay the foster homes caregivers directly. Is that accurate?
So we, yes, DCF sets the rate, which is has changed from like the previous contract. I know we've been in this one for, 4 years already, but previously we set the rates for different kids. But yes, DCF now sets all of the rates for the children. There's very rarely a time where we're able to do a specialized or higher rate than the ones that are on the rate structure. We pay foster homes, and then DCF reimburses us. Okay. So yeah, essentially they're paying for it, but it comes from us first so that the families get that immediately, and then DCF reimburses us later.
And
so I'll tell you, Adrienne, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to clarify real quick. Like, we talk about the daily rate reimbursement, but then also try to keep in mind that that is to support the kid. But then there's things like, daycare assistance, and like if a kid is in a camp for the summer that sometimes KVC pays for. So while they might only get the $24 a day, there's sometimes those other additional things that KVC helps with too. So just.
And that was one, thank you, Adrienne. That was actually one of my questions. And for example, if a child in placement destroys something in the home, will that placement be reimbursed for that?
I hate to say it depends, but that's my favorite answer. But it depends on the circumstance and the level of care that the family is receiving. We also have a policy where they can, if it's a big damage is like really large, they can make an insurance claim, and then we can assist with paying part of like that deductible that they have to meet. So we do have a policy about that. But if they only receive like a basic 1 rate and the child's, breaking things, we would probably help for 1, trying to increase the level of care for them, but 2, we may be able to help with the repairs for certain things too. I know that's not an answer for you though.
No, that's a good answer. My last question has to do with what I think are many misperceptions in the general public about homes that take in foster kids, and the perception being that they're doing it just for the money. But I do wonder to what extent, if any, the payments might in fact contribute to general income of those families. And I'm asking this not with a bias, because I think it would be perfectly reasonable if part of that payment contributed to their general income.
Yeah, so families that license are supposed to have income outside of the foster care reimbursement. And so they have to meet like the poverty guidelines, which are fairly easy to meet for families, our families. And then their budget can't be upside down, so they can't have more expenditures than income coming in. There is an exception process that if, I know we have like one family in mind in particular where they quit their job so that they could full-time foster youth and to utilize some of that reimbursement for like the needs of the home as well. But that isn't a regular occurrence. That would have to be like an exception through DCF that they would have to approve. But I will say that, yes, there are families that do appear to be doing it for monetary benefit. And we do our best to try to weed out families that are motivated by money, because really we want to ensure families are there to take care of the kids. And the majority of families that we work with are amazing human beings and just really want to help do what's good for kids. And they're just really great people that open up their home to kids and families. Although you don't have to be like a superhero to do it. Anyone can be a foster parent. So I don't know if that answers your question either.
It does. I just find it an interesting issue because, you know, we've talked a lot about how homemakers, mainly women, have been given, it's unpaid labor, and there's an inequality there. There's an unfairness there, and I see sort of the same issue relevant for people who take children and give them a lot of special care.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. Yeah. If we don't have any questions right now, I can maybe go over a little bit more about my department and then we could break for questions after that. Does that sound okay? Okay. So like I said, I'm Anastasia, or I go by Stasia. I've been with KVC for 10 years and in this position for 4 years. And so I am over Douglas County, but I also oversee supervisors and family service coordinators. So the workers that work with the foster families in other areas. So I oversee Topeka, Hiawatha, and like that Topeka rural 8-county area over there. I have some families down in Ottawa and some in some pretty rural areas like over by Manhattan. It's like a 20-county area, and I'm not sure how we came up with the way that we did. And I am one of 3 CPA directors with KVC. And so we have one over the metro, so that's Evan Wood. And then we have a CPA director over the South region, and that's Lisa Milford, and she's been with KVC longer than I've been alive, I think. And I would say that to her face, I promise. And she is wonderful as well. She has some supervisors. Each of us have 2 supervisors that oversee staff that work with our foster families. So we have families that are what we call general foster homes. So just families that are wanting to foster, they go through the classes, and then we get them licensed and started. And then we also oversee non-related kin. So those people that are related to kids, like a teacher or a family friend, they're not related by blood, and they have to become licensed in order to take those kids. So we kind of do the process backwards with them, where we do a walkthrough, background checks, make sure they're okay for kids coming into care, or even after they're in care. We place the child with them, and then they go through the foster parent courses that are required and all of the fun paperwork and things that they have to do. So in my department, sorry, go ahead, Joan.
That brought up a question of how many foster families do you have that might have a distant relationship with the children that they are supervising or temporarily overseeing? Is it a common practice or a very uncommon practice for it to be a relative?
For a non-relative, or do you mean a relative?
Well,
Or-
what's the balance and what's the most prevalent?
Well, our most prevalent is, well, it would be relatives. I don't have the statistics right off the top of my head, but I know we have at least 40% relatives. Lawrence is actually one of the higher areas right now for relative rates. Combined with their non-related kin, we have about 50% of kids with people that they know. So in Lawrence, I think we're about 10% of kids with non-related kin. So it is pretty prevalent. Actually, in 2022 and 2021, I actually licensed more non-related kin than I did general foster homes, because we've been able to identify more families for kids as time goes. So it is a pretty common practice, and they're held to the same licensing standards that what we call a general care foster home would be too.
Is it usually a first review of, is there someone that the child knows where we might send them, versus asking that type of a question versus automatically removing them and finding them a placement? Or is that one of the higher priorities, is does the child know where they're going?
So part of that might be more on the DCF side, because like when we have kids that are being removed from their home, there are times where there are relatives and somebody that they could go to not come into care. When we do get the referral from DCF, our first thing we're always looking at is relatives first. We always want to place them with somebody that they know. And then after relatives comes the non-related kin, or for kids that are 16 and up, we call it an approved home, because they don't have to be licensed. And then after that, we're looking for a foster. Then if we can't find a foster, it's a facility and things like that down the line.
Thank you.
Sure thing. So in my department for Douglas County, I have a supervisor, her name's Heather Quinn, and then I have 2 staff that are devoted to the families that we have in Douglas County. We do have, we have 67 foster homes in Douglas County, and 42 of those are sponsored by KVC. So we are not only like a provider for foster care, so as CMP, so case management provider. So that's one of those 4 agencies, TFI, Cornerstone, St. Francis, KVC. So we're not only that part of things, but we also have a CPA, so we're a child placing agency. And there's many more of those in the state. So like Ember Hope or DECA, they're a CPA. So I know sometimes those get confusing, especially when we overlap having a CMP and a CPA. But KVC sponsors 42 of those foster homes in Douglas County. And throughout our agency, we have about 700 foster homes, and we're the largest CPA in the state. So what our family service coordinators do every month is they're helping to support families with the placements that they do have. They're meeting with them at least monthly. Probably some of my foster homes, we talk to daily, which is great. I'm not saying that's not a negative. We're just helping to support them, make sure that they have all of the resources that they need for placement. And then we're also working with Adrienne's department to help make sure we find placement for kids in our family homes if they can't go to a relative or an interkin. Within my whole department, because I have a supervisor for the Topeka area, I have about 15 staff, 2 supervisors, like I said. We also work to place non-contract youth, like Adrienne was talking about. So those kids that are from Cornerstones or TFI or St. Francis, we have those kids in our our foster homes as well. And so we work regularly with those agencies as well as DECA or other CPAs as well. I know you asked about what information we have about other sponsored agencies. So we do have some information in our own internal database about family foster homes, but also in that care map system, we can go in and kind of look at other foster homes through other agencies. We, in my department, don't use the placing matching system as much. Adrienne's department primarily utilizes that to look for placements, and then my staff are looking more at like the individual needs of the youth and the individual needs of the family, and knowing, hey, these are the 10 homes I know I can call that takes this level of care, that takes this age range, because each foster home is licensed for a certain age range and, like I said, capacity number of kids. So we kind of go through and look through those. I would say, I know one of the questions you had asked, Heather, is like, what is one of the most frustrating pieces of our work? And I would say it has to be trying to find placements for all the youth and just the community, maybe not understanding that the need for foster homes and families to take these kids is so high that there is literally not enough places to put these kids. I would never want a child to have to go to a one-night placement. I would never want a child to have to sleep in the office, but sometimes that's the reality we face when we don't have enough foster homes to meet the needs of the youth that we have. And then the kids that we do have are just really high acuity. They have so many needs that would be better served potentially by the JAJA side of things, or what used to be the JJ side of things before things changed. And we just don't have everything that we need. I will also say, I know I'm picking two frustrating pieces, but another frustrating piece is just that sometimes we can kind of see our foster families as more of a daycare center, but really these are people that really open their own home to these kids, that really care about them, but they also have a family and needs themselves. I know there was a recent article that came, or study that came out about some foster homes that have recently closed in the state, and that was primarily because they were overwhelmed, and we have overwhelmed them. But it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy where we have to overwhelm them because we don't want kids sleeping in the office, but I also don't want them overwhelmed. So, because they need self-care just as much as everybody else does too, and they're not just a daycare center. The most rewarding piece is working with the families and getting to know them, because they are really great people that have really good hearts for what they're doing. Do you guys have any additional questions? I think I answered all of your questions, Heather, but if you have anything else you want to ask me, let me know.
I'm curious. I was a CASA for many years, and while I was a CASA, the push to keep children with their families rather than to pull them into foster care got started and I think increased gained momentum. How has this affected KVC? Have you seen fewer children coming into your foster care at KVC over the years?
Adrienne, feel free to jump in too, but overall, the state of Kansas has decreased the number of kids in foster care. And so by at least 1,000 is what I recently read. But so we have decreased significantly. I will say they also developed a system called team decision making that they they didn't develop it, but they started utilizing that within DCF and KVC. And so DCF has to hold a team decision-making meeting prior to a child being removed from their family home. And so that's really led to a decrease in some of the kids coming in, because they're slowing down, kind of thinking through, where are these family members at? Can they go to them instead of coming to care? Because as we all know, the foster care system is not perfect, and we would prefer kids to not have to come in at all. KVC also uses team decision-making as well for when kids move or are suspected to potentially move. So each time a child moves, we're supposed to hold a team decision-making meeting where we all get the family together, the foster family, the biological family, the family's home worker, the children's worker, CASA, GAL even. And we kind of all come together and talk through what supports could we maybe put into place to keep this child in the home, because we want to preserve their placement and increase placement ability, excuse me. And a lot of times we're able to kind of prevent some disruptions, and other times it moves. I know I went off on a tangent about PDMs, but I think I answered your question. Any other questions for Adrienne or I?
I just was going to look through the questions as well, but these are probably unfair questions since you didn't have them in advance, but I'm curious. It seems like potentially to facilitate the goal, and I think Joan maybe was remembering, we had Evan Wood do an in-service probably 2 or 3 years ago when that push came about with, looking for those families. Do you feel like you are licensing families that aren't going to take other kids down the road because they're doing it for their own family members? And so you've now you're going to have people that aren't going to foster anymore just automatically because they're doing it for their own bio or their own kin that they're already have an attachment to, which I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just was thinking that through. We're creating some lack of people that will do it for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, we have seen some, obviously family, there's been a couple where they're already in class and then somebody that they know comes into care. Mm-hmm. We are able to also license relatives pretty easily too. There's a waiver process kind of similar to an interkin where we can license them while the child's in the home. They don't have to go through all the classes first, which has been great. We've seen an increase in, I mean, it's still not very high, but we've seen an increase in the number of licensed relatives we've had. I think the most reason why we have homes closing, which I know is not exactly your question, but it's more just from like the overwhelm that they're experiencing from the foster care system and the number of kids that are needing a place to stay. We did see quite a bit of increase though when Evan was kind of the one that kind of branched off and made his own, I mean, not that he got to decide that, making his own department, but he was the head of the kinship department for a while, and having that specific department focused on kinship has really increased the number of families that we're able to identify, and then the number of workers we have has like doubled, almost tripled since then too. So that way we have people really just focused on finding family for kids and not just placement, but also like maintaining those connections of family too.
I think another way to restate my question kind of from a different perspective is, have you had relatives of children who came into foster care or came into DCF custody, trying to train myself and volunteers to talk about custody and not use the word foster care and exchangeably, have you had those bio relatives and our kin go on to foster other non-related, non-known to them children. And you may
Okay.
do that in your CPA role exactly, but I just was curious if you see that pass off from kinship and our kin to basic foster home.
Yes, actually, we have seen that a few. I can think of a few instances, yes, particularly when we have like a non-related kin who already has to become licensed. Doing like a change of licensure isn't super difficult, and so having them amend to general foster care to be able to take other youth isn't very hard. And so when we have families that are going to close their license, we always try and ask them if they would like to amend to taking other youth. And we have had success in that with some families. For relatives, I think there's maybe been one or two that I can think of that have license too.
I think in my own mind how some of my volunteers have like retired slowly from volunteering, where it was every month, and then they went to a board that served 4 times a year, and then they just became alternates. Do you see foster homes also turn into respite only? Is that an option for them?
Yes, it is. We don't have like some states have like a specific foster care license for like respite only. We don't have that in the state of Kansas, but we do have some families that only do respite care, or that have been worn out and need a break. And so then they only want to do respite sometimes, or we leave them open just with the idea to do respite. And then we also have families that take higher acuity youth and then need a break and take like those younger kids too, and kind of decrease on the age range that they're willing to accept.
This
And
is
then
a little, oh,
Go
sorry,
ahead.
this is a little different. I was just going to add too, like if you think about some that are foster homes for a while and then they become an adoptive resource,
Yeah.
and they adopt a kid and then they close their license too. I don't know the statistics on that, but I feel like some of them,
Right.
I know a few that I can think of off the top that, were a foster home for a long time and then adopted, and we're like, they're done with fostering. So.
I think there's some attrition that seems sort of natural to the whole process, depending on where you are in their child's permanency ending as well. And then I just was curious, I think when we were talking about maybe scoring, you said gender didn't come into scoring, but are there foster homes that choose to work with a specific gender, and how is that working with gender fluidity or trans situations in Kansas?
So I don't, and I haven't used CareMatch in a while, but I said that because I don't think CareMatch takes into account what gender the home typically takes. And then for licensing, they license for both male and female, always, but so we have notes for every family in CareMatch and then our own system. And so then we put in there like what their age range and gender preferences are, or that the family will really only accept this because, and it may be because the child has to room share and they can only room share with a child of a certain age and gender. But yes, we have a lot of families that will like primarily take like teen girls, for example, or teen boys. It's sometimes better that they're only willing to take one or the other gender for teens. So we have a lot of families that have that preference too.
Related to this, is there any special training for families that might take a child who has been identified as transgender or non-binary?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that back, because I didn't answer that piece of the question about gender fluid youth too. So we do not have a specific training that's required for families. However, we do have 3 foster family trainers. And so their whole position is really to help train our families, either doing regular trainings through like Child Alliance is the one that puts on a lot of the trainings for us, and they go through that website. And then they can also do one-on-one training. So we have some families that if we know they're going to take specific youth and they maybe don't have all of the qualifications to meet the needs of those youth, we'll have that trainer assigned to kind of do some individualized training with that family. There are also like some specific licensing rules as far as like room sharing for youth that identify as trans or are the opposite gender of what they were biologically born with. And so sometimes that prohibits us from placing kids with certain families because of how their home is made up. I don't know if that makes any sense. But because they already have some certain youth, they may not be able to room share with a youth that's trans.
I think that makes sense.
I keep asking questions, but this is such a good opportunity to get more insight. My sister works with programs in Cincinnati that focus on children in the brought into welfare system, child welfare system. And what she has noticed is that the children seem to have, with the greater efforts to keep families together, the children who actually come into the system seem to have greater problems, that their needs are more problematic. Do you have anything to say about what you see?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And then when we had the change too of like a few years ago, and maybe one of you can help me out, there was Senate bill something that was changed to where youth that previously went in the JJA system are now coming into foster care. Do you guys recall what I'm talking about? I wish I knew it off the top of my head too, but that has played a huge impact because we have a lot of what we consider crossover youth that are now coming into care that really have higher acuity needs than what a foster parent can provide. Like even kids that can't even be maintained in a secure facility or in a psychiatric residential treatment facility. They can't meet the needs of this youth. And so a foster family really can't either.
I just refer to that as the Juvenile Justice Reform Bill, and they did some work on that this legislative session, and it was to, I think, put some more, lengthen the term of probation for kids as an option, and a couple other things. I think the focus still is really trying to prevent correctional facility overusage potentially.
Yeah.
But yeah, it sometimes that pendulum, and I have a former volunteer that was a social work professor, and he used to say it's so hard. We swing one direction and then we overcompensate, we go back the other direction. We're not in the middle very long.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Any other questions?
I actually do have another one, and it's that I would like to know more about what's available in the state of Kansas for kids who really need psychological residential care.
Adrienne, feel free to jump in. Do you want to talk about like our PRTFs?
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to mention them, but I don't know, like in terms of like the wait list is kind of fluid, unfortunately, because it's dependent on people being released and things like that. So I mean, that's the only thing I was
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't know if it makes sense to future cast, but I don't watch a lot of news, listen to NPR stuff nationally. But I was in Kansas City and I saw an article about the new partnership with Children's Mercy and KVC. So if we don't have numbers now, maybe we could talk about Kansas, you all and Children's Mercy trying to actually expand the options.
Yes.
I don't
And
know a ton about it, but
I don't, other than knowing about the partnership and that our intention is to increase the number of PRTF beds in the state, I don't have a ton of knowledge about that. I know we have several PRTFs, but like Adrienne said, in the state of Kansas, not within KVC, but there is a long wait list, unfortunately. It's the last time I knew it was about a month or two long in order to get into a PRTF. And then, I mean, we do have two within the state. So we have one in Hayes and one in Kansas City as well with our Camber hospitals.
mhm.
And I guess I'd like to add to just that PRTF can deny a kid if they look at the referral and they're like, hey, we're not going to accept Susie because of her extreme behaviors. So I think that's a little bit of a frustration on our department's end when we have this kid who's been on the wait list and we've reached out to 5 different PRTFs and they're denying that youth. So yeah.
I'm writing notes for follow-up and I'm wondering just if it would be helpful. And I know it's probably a number that can change based on what agencies decide to do with their placements. But I was curious if we could get a number of PRTF beds in Kansas and the QRTP placement beds as a follow-up, a handout that I could put with this video in the future, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Along with the number of homes in Douglas and our contingent counties that are open for placement, not existing homes, like not the relative homes, not the NR-kin homes, but just your basic foster home. Does that make sense?
Yeah. The ones that
You can
have,
call and use.
I could probably provide you with information on our KVC homes.
Sure.
And I know we have the majority of
Right.
homes in Kansas, but I could tell you how many like open beds we have in Douglas County. If
Cool.
that would,
Yeah.
okay.
Is there a DCF contact that would work like informationally to ask for the surrounding counties? Because I think we're very pleased when we can get a placement in Leavenworth or Shawnee County, Franklin, you know.
Leslie Renneback would be
Oh, we know Leslie.
okay. Yeah, she would be a really great person to reach out to because she also sends us like a weekly report of the foster homes by agency. So
Nice.
she may be able to pull like the openings too.
Okay, great. Well, I do want to thank you both for your time today and for the volunteers that asked questions. We've come across the 1 o'clock hour. Jan, I did notice you unmuted. Did you have any questions you wanted to ask?
I'm fairly new CASA, and my kid is getting ready to enter into the adoption phase, I hope, if there's no appeal. So my only question really, and so I wasn't sure if it was beyond the scope of this session.
We can find out.
If there is an average of how long it takes for a kinship adoption. I guess the second question is, if in this particular case, the kid's been with a kinship for 2 years, do they have to open it up to other potential adopting people?
I could answer that from experience, but I'll defer to agency representatives at this point. as to the actual policies.
Yeah, so we actually do not have to open it up to other parties. And so if that child's been with that placement, they would fill out an adoption packet. We would have to do a home study of their home. If there was another interested resource, they would have to do the same. And then we would take both parties to a best interest staffing to determine the best person. However, if there's not another person, we would likely just do a best interest staffing waiver where we just email out the information, and if no one objects, then we move to the next stage in the adoption process. And then that family would be
So
selected.
how do you know if there's another adoption resource? They've already contacted you, or?
Yes, Heather, do you want to answer?
My experience is that it might be a grandparent or other relative who
Right.
is either aware of the situation and not able to take placement, becomes aware during the life of the case. And we've even had some that, like the termination of parental rights when a father's location was unknown and they published in the paper. Like, you wouldn't believe that publishing in the paper in Louisiana would find its way to the grandparent. So
Do
there's a
you
difference.
have to advertise? Okay, do you have to advertise? Okay, well, we're getting ready to, you know.
No,
this
Jan, what I was referring to was the notice regarding termination. And so
Right, but I'm talking about adoption. So let's say that
Right.
it's now
I'm just
ready.
telling you when a relative could come forward in my
Right.
experience. So,
But
no,
you don't have to give notice, for example, to potential relatives or that kind of thing.
they've been
No.
noticed of the hearings up until that date. So
Okay.
case plan situations don't require public notice or a notice.
Okay,
All relatives that were required to receive notice by statute because of their biological relationship, that relationship in essence is terminated when the parents' rights are terminated.
okay. Well, that's a good thing to know.
And we'll reserve
Thank you.
that question on adoption timeframes for your supervisor, because the averages vary greatly.
Okay, thank you.
But thanks for bringing it forward today. Appreciate you joining us. And again, thank you to our KVC representatives. And I'll send you a follow-up email again with thank yous, and try to solicit some questions from anybody who wasn't able to attend. I sent the questions in advance, so I think you've covered all of our inquisitive people here today, and appreciate the discussion and dialogue you were able to have with us. So
Thank you.
thank you all. All right,
Thank you.
take care. I'll end the
Thank
meeting. Stop the recording.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.